Hello and welcome to my review of Doctor Who, The War Doctor, Only the Monstrous, the first box set in the War Doctor saga. How exciting! We've actually got the War Doctor on Big Finish. This is a dream come true. I remember back in January when we were sort of going, what would we like to see on Big Finish and Big Finish fans, and this come up, the War Doctor. We wanted to see John, and we thought, it's never going to happen, but here it is. We've actually got it in front of us. So without me babbling, saying how wonderful it is to have the War Doctor in audio, let's see if it is actually worth having the War Doctor in audio. So let's go and have a look how this box set is presented. So for the cover art we have full cast audio drama there, the Big Finish logo. We have the man himself, the War Doctor, the Dalek, an exploding Dalek, and some sort of machinery, sort of metallic background there. We have the Dalek drill machine already used in the Thousand Worlds and the Heart of Battle. We have a Gallifreyan warrior there. We have BBC Doctor Who, the War Doctor, Only the Monstrous, starring John Hurt and Jacqueline Pearce. On the side we have the War Doctor, Only the Monstrous, and we have the picture of the War Doctor from the cover. Then on the back of this sort of muddy effect there, and we have what this sort of box set is about. And on the other side we have the spines there with the War Doctor there. So the cover for the individual releases, we have Doctor Who, John Hurt, the War Doctor, Part 1, The Innocent. Then we have the picture of the War Doctor there with the third Doctor intro of an explosion. We've got a picture of Rejoice, some missiles, a boat, and the man himself, the War Doctor, and some water there from the ending by the lake. And on the back we just have the cover again, just smaller, and then what the story's about. And there is a misprint on these because it says running time is 80 minutes, but they are an hour long. Now into the second story, we have some Dalek machinery there, building, and the Dalek drill project sort of thing. And then we have some 3.75 inch Daleks there, and then we have the sort of icon what's changed to a greeny background, and of course the War Doctor and a Dalek spaceship there. And on the back again the cover is a bit smaller, and again what the story's about. Then we have, for the final story, the Heart of Battle, we have Cardinal Olestra. Then we have the War Doctor Dalek, and then some more Daleks and a planet there, and the drills from this story. Then cover again, and then what the story is about. Now for the little leaflets. For The Innocent we have writers and director's notes and the cast list there. Then we have a picture of the cast members there, and the nice image they used for when they announced the box set. Then we have a bigger group shot of the cast there and the production credits. The disc art is exactly the same as the covers. We have the Thousand Worlds disc art, then the Heart of Battle. Then we have the bonus disc with behind the scenes stuff, which I found quite interesting and quite a nice little listen to, just where John Hurt talking about techniques of radio and all that sort of stuff. So that's very interesting to hear that, and it's interesting to hear Nicholas Briggs's inspiration and how this box set came about. Now The Innocent, you think that would be quite an explosive story, action packed, and it sort of isn't. I mean, the start of a story, it is very sort of action packed. You're literally thrown into the action, which is great, and it sort of reminds me of The Brink of Death. You're literally thrown in the story. But to me, I think The Innocent is very much setting up a series, and to me it does it brilliantly. I think that the story itself, you know, it isn't really plot driven, but it's very much a character piece, which is us getting to know all the characters within this box set, which I think is just a nice little idea for Nicholas Briggs to do. And with this story being a character piece, the Daleks aren't really in it, which I'm gonna say is quite a good thing, and it is refreshing. After Dark Eyes, with the Daleks being in practically every box set bar Dark Eyes 3, you know, you're sort of a bit pig sick of them. So it's kind of nice just to have a story where the Daleks aren't really the main focus, and it's just brilliant. So with the Daleks out of the way, we're introduced to another new threat, which are very much like the Daleks, a genocidal race called the Talians, who are sort of at war with the Keskins in a way, and the Keskins themselves are very much like the Time Lords, so that's a nice little similarity, that the Talians are, you know, genocidal like the Daleks, and you've got the Keskins, who are very much sort of sophisticated and don't really want war, they don't want to interfere and stuff, so they sort of remind me of the Time Lords, so it's a sort of a very nice similarity between them. Before I forget it, I've just got to say there is a nice little Dalek master plan reference with the Time Destructor. So it was nice just to have that little throwback in there, what David Richardson said. I'll put that in there. Now, character-wise, I've got to start off with the man himself, the War Doctor, John Hurt. And John Hurt, he does an absolute fantastic job, as you would expect. And Nicholas Briggs, he really does know how to write for the War Doctor. You just wonder why he wasn't like that in the 50th. So Nicholas Briggs really does know how to capture the essence of the War Doctor and what he stands for and what he is. Now, this story, he is grumpy. He doesn't really want to talk to anybody. He just wants to get things done. And this is probably the most grumpiest we see him in the box set. But despite him being grumpy, he's able to crack a few jokes, and you just fall in love with him. And as the story progresses, it becomes a lot more softer in character. Now, what I love about this story about the War Doctor as well is that you really do get the sense that he's quite battle-hardened, that he's been in this war for quite some time, and he's sort of getting a bit sick of it, but he feels like it's his duty to continue. And there's a point I'll bring up later on about why he feels he has to continue this war. And there's another bit what I think is a great bit of character piece, what Nick Briggs has brought into the Big Finish audios, is that he still renounces the name of the Doctor, because it was referenced, he didn't want to be called the Doctor in Engines of War or the TV stories. So it's quite nice that Nicholas Briggs has continued that vibe. When he first arrived on Keska, he's like, "Who are you?" He's like, "No one." And that's just great. That's a powerful bit in the trailer. Another character point, what I really do like, is that he didn't want to press the button. If you've listened to the story, you'll get what I mean. He didn't want to press the button, as he didn't feel like it was his place to press that button. He felt like it was the Keskan's duty, because he's no one, and he doesn't want to decide what happens about the Keskan race. And the reason he helps the Keskans is rather heartwarming, as he thinks that there should be more races like the Keskans. Despite all the horror of war, he can see the light shining throughout their race, which I think is quite nice, and he thinks there's a bit of light still shining despite all this darkness, what is sort of overshadowing everything with the war. Now, there's a nice little moment we get within the Doctor with him having flashbacks, so you sort of get him sort of reliving some of the horrors of the war, what he's faced, so he's sort of having nightmares. And that's great, because you sort of get like a little mini story within this story, so it's great. And we really get to see what the Doctor has sort of faced over the past sort of time he has been fighting within this war. Now, my favourite scene of the War Doctor, it has to be the lake scene, just because he wants solitude, and it's great that the War Doctor opens up as a character. He's been quite a hardened character, and he just cracks by the lake. He shows his fondness to Rejoice, which is just a beautiful moment, saying that there would be a time where this could be a start of a beautiful friendship. And because of the war, I think that pains him, because he wants to be with Rejoice, he wants to travel, show Rejoice the wonders, but he just can't. And I just think that's such a brilliant moment, and it's just great. And we get some great dialogue between him and I'm trying to remember the character's name, Veclin, with her saying, "Oh, come on, Doctor," and he just flips, and we just see the rage of the War Doctor, which is great. Now, going back to a point I made about why the Doctor feels like he has to continue fighting this war, is that he blames himself with what happened in Genesis of the Daleks. He feels that if he stopped the Daleks, the Time War wouldn't happen. It wouldn't be there, and that makes him have a guilty conscience, which is quite interesting, and that's a very interesting bit for the War Doctor himself. And there's a bit, that he says that he has to do the unthinkable. He has to continue doing this, and that makes him feel like a monster. And that is a very powerful bit when he just completely loses it with Rejoice. Just saying, look at me, am I a monster now? and that just gives John Hurt some brilliant bit. I mean, John Hurt gets some fantastic speeches throughout this box. I mean, another one of my favourite speeches is at the end of the Heart of a Battle, which I'll cover obviously in the Heart of the Battle. But John Hurt just gets some really good, powerful speeches. Now I'm going to talk about John Hurt's actual performance. Now, when I heard the trailer, it just seemed like John Hurt was just reading the lines. But since I've listened to this, you sort of get that feeling at the beginning. But as the story progresses, you sort of forget and you start imagining John Hurt, the War Doctor. You imagine his story, and you just forget that he's reading it in a way. But he does it in a brilliant fashion. He's absolutely superb, and it's obviously the highlight of this box set for everyone, I think. And it's just great to have him on the side of Big Finish. So John Hurt did a fantastic job, and I can't wait to see what they do with the War Doctor next. Now on to Rejoice, the sort of companion of this episode, and she reminds me a lot of Molly O'Sullivan. She's sort of version 2 of Molly O'Sullivan in the sense that she's caring, she's sweet, and she nurses the Doctor back to health. And she sort of is a beacon of hope. She sort of, in my eyes, she is a beacon of hope for the Doctor. And I like her reasonings why she wants to travel with the Doctor. She wants to travel with the Doctor, that's to be expected. But her reasons, I think, are quite valid, in the sense that, the Doctor is sort of like saying he's a monster, and she wants to remind the Doctor that he is a good person. She wants to clear the Doctor's conscience that, no matter how dark things get, she will be the beacon of hope for the Doctor. So I really do like why she wants to travel with the Doctor, just so she can remind him that, he is a good person. She's clever, as she sort of understands why the Doctor renounces his own name, which is a nice little moment in itself, and that's why the lake scene just makes this story even more fantastic in my eyes. And she doesn't like to see the Doctor being bullied, because Veclin has a go at the Doctor, and she stands up for the Doctor, which is really nice. That despite her not knowing the Doctor that long, she still understands what the Doctor stands for, and she doesn't want the Doctor to be bullied, which I just think is nice. And the ending, whew, what a bittersweet moment. Yeah, absolutely bittersweet, and it was sort of a shame what happened. Now on to Cardinal Olestra, played by Jacqueline Pearce, who does a fantastic job of being this sort of quite Dalek-like Cardinal, really. She's sort of an interesting character. She's sort of a peace mover, and she will do anything to get her own way, even if that is risking her own people's lives. I suppose you've got to be like that in a war effort, in tough situations. So sort of understandable. And she's quite ruthless, so that's sort of where I see a similarity to sort of a Dalek. And she's very patronising, and she gets this fantastic speech about war, and it makes you question, what does war stand for? About hypocrisy. So it's very interesting, that speech, and it's probably her standout moment from The Innocent. So Jacqueline Pearce did a fantastic job playing Cardinal Alice. Now on to Veclin. Now she's quite a snotty character. She's a goody two-shoes sort of character. She follows orders, and she doesn't want to disappoint Cardinal Olestra. So she's very much a goody two-shoes, as it were. And it's quite interesting how the Doctor sort of rebels against her at the end by the lake, saying, "Oh, I'm going on the boat now, so you can wait there while I go and have fun, because you're only obeying orders, so you've got to come back and capture me. So go on, wait for me." So yeah, she's a very interesting character, and I think I'll talk more about her character a bit more in depth over the next 2 stories, because there's not much to go on Veclin at this moment in time in the box set, other than she's quite a snotty character and only obeys orders. The sound design for this box set, for this story, is just superb. From ships blowing up, and it's got this sort of time sort of rewinding feel, which is a fantastic little bit of sound design. Even to like with this sort of fruit juice in the glass, and you've got ice tingling around in the glass. It just has excellent sound design. The War Doctor theme, I suppose I've got to cover, is brilliant actually. When I first heard it, I wasn't much of a fan of it, to be honest. I thought it was very much a rehash of the Damaged Goods theme. But since I've re-listened to it a couple of times, I say a couple, it's more like 20 or so, because I've just sort of got addicted to it, and I've become a fan of it. It's not what I would have imagined the War Doctor theme to be, but it still has that sort of new series essence with this sort of orchestral feel. But nonetheless, it's still a good theme by Howard Carter. So I suppose I better rate The Innocent. The Innocent gets a solid 10 out of 10. A fantastic character piece story, nice simple plot. You don't have to sort of be fully engaged with it. You know, it's a nice character piece for the War Doctor, getting to know all the characters. Brilliant acting by John Hurt and Lucy Briggs and Jacqueline Pearce, and I think it's Beth Chalmers. Overall, it's just a superb story. It's a nice little way to set the box up. I know people aren't a fan of it, but I just quite like a nice little quiet story to set up the box up, because obviously you're not going to be having action throughout the three stories, so it's nice just to have a nice still story with nice little bits of action throughout the story, and a nice bit of character moments towards the end by the lake. So yeah, 10 out of 10 for The Innocent. So now let's go on to the second story, The Thousand Worlds. Thousand Worlds is very much the builder episode where the actual plotline does kick in, and this is sort of how I imagined the Time War to be, with the Doctor being sent off to do missions for the Time Lords. Now the story itself does remind me of the Ark, with how the tables have turned. If you've listened to the story, you'll sort of get what I mean by that. To me, the story does suffer pacing issues. Some bits are rather slow and tedious, and then you get this fast bit with action, but the final track is where the story actually does sort of heat up and makes you want to listen to the heart of battle straight away, just because the cliffhanger is just superb and it just wants you to go on to the next story. Re-listening to this, you know, I found new appreciation for it. I mean, when I first listened to it, I wasn't a big fan of this, to be honest, but since re-listening to it, I've grown to like it a bit more and accept what it is, because it is, you know, the builder episode, you know, and it is setting up for the grand finale, the heart of battle. Going on to characters, the War Doctor continues his sort of sassy sarcasticness, which I really do like, and he still is very rebellious to the Time Lord, so that's making us sort of, you know that he is the Doctor. He still rebels against the Time Lords, and he even says, you know, oh, you're becoming like the Daleks, just obeying orders, which is very interesting to hear. And his adjustment to the sonic screwdriver, the way he escapes the Time Lords, is just brilliant, and he goes on the run again before, you know, Veclin can chase after him, so I think that's just a brilliant little bit, what I like. And John Hurt, or the War Doctor, saying bog off, I don't know why, but I just think that's a little great moment and just made me smile. Olestra, she continues to be this dominant figure, as you would expect, and she shows a sort of sly and devious side this time, with this sort of weird laugh when the Doctor leaves, just go, oh, you never cease to abuse me, Doctor. So yeah, it's very interesting. I think I'm going to cover quite a bit more on her in the heart of battle, because I think that's when she comes very much into the story. She's very much on the sidelines of the first two stories. Veclin, I can talk a bit more about her now because she's in this story a bit more. She's relentless in the sense that she's wants to get the Doctor back, chasing after the Doctor, and she continues that goody two-shoe vibe. I mean, she's quite authoritative, with Bennis and Arbiton. She thinks fast on her feet, in tight situations, so it's great to see her more expanded instead of just being this quite snotty character. Bennis and Arbiton are interesting because they've got this interesting sort of plot thing. Why were they chosen to go on this mission, and why the Doctor saved them in The Innocent? Because, actually I'm not going to say, but it's very interesting why they were chosen for this certain mission. Arbiton's fate is quite horrific, and Bennis seems to be sort of rather slow once Arbiton died, because he's sort of showing why he was sort of chosen, why he sort of hesitates. The Daleks, you can see Nick Briggs gets a lot of inspiration from 60s sort of Dalek Mania stuff, with this sort of being like a Dalek invasion of Earth story, with the Daleks obviously mining to the core, and using slavery from the planet's people to do their dirty work. So it's very much like the Dalek invasion of Earth. Even though what they're doing is rather predictable, because I listened to the Apocalypse Element not long ago, so this does seem a bit of a predictable plotline with what they're doing. But despite the Daleks being in this, I still think they're quite light within this. It's sort of Dalek-like story. They don't feature heavily in it, so that's sort of nice to listen to. Now on to Ceratrix, the guy the Doctor, Veclin, Arverton and Bennis are trying to save. Now his whole introduction is really interesting, and his character revelation just adds to the cliffhanger and just makes you go, wow, I really want to listen to the Heart of Battle right now. He sort of reminds me of a hippie and a vicar. That's a bit of an odd combination, I know. And there's at some points in the story, sort of reminds me of the Controller from Day of the Daleks. So yeah, and it good character nonetheless, and I'd be interested to see what I say about him in the Heart of Battle. Yeah, there's a clever bit of sound design I want to mention in this story. Is when the explosions go off, you get this sort of ringing noise, which sort of matches what the soldiers would hear. So I think that's a clever bit of sound design, and just puts you right into the sort of battle sequence with the explosions going off. So I suppose I better rate the Heart of Battle, Thousand Worlds. Sorry, I'm gonna give it 7 out of 10. Pretty good story. It does what it needs to do, build up the Heart of Battle brilliantly. So there we are, 7 out of 10 for Thousand. The Heart of Battle. Yes, the Dalek plan is in full swing, and you don't know who is on the right side and the wrong side. Despite this being, an action story, I would say 1/3 of the story comprises of just talking, which is still good because you're still getting action in the sense of conflict with dialogue instead of conflict with explosions and all action. So it's very sort of conflict. It's quite a conflict story, this one, with battles and Ceratrix and the Doctor. So there's great conflict between characters. So you don't always need action just to have conflict. So that's very good. But after that 1/3 done up, the rest of the story is Daleks blowing up. And the story itself, it ties up all the loose ends what have been, plotted throughout this box set, and the box set, goes full circle. So it's ready to start off the second set, Infernal Devices, so you haven't got any sort of overarching things to go into the next set of box sets, so that's great. So this is very much a self-contained box set. Now onto the War Doctor. He continues his caring side, but still is clouded in guilt, with him still thinking he has to do the unthinkable. This story, the Doctor has gone full circle as a character. Where in The Innocent he wouldn't press a button, but this time he, pressed a button, and he says, to do what is necessary, you have to become a monster to defeat the monsters, which I just think is a powerful bit of dialogue by John Hurt, by Nicholas Briggs, performed by John Hurt, I should say. And he can see that the Time Lords are becoming more and more like the Daleks. Says, aren't we better than this? Just because there's a lesser race there doesn't mean we have to kill her. She's innocent. Just to show our power, she doesn't need to be killed. So at the end of it, we've got a fantastic speech about where to find the Doctor, and to me that rounds up this box set superbly, and is really a kudos to Nicholas Briggs' fabulous writing in general. Now onto Ceratrix. He's still a happy, clappy fanatic, with him wanting peace with the Daleks, which is kind of, it's been done before, but it's still one of those nice things to see, and it has nice conflict between the Doctor and obviously Ceratrix, with him wanting peace, and the Doctor's like, no, the Daleks are evil, you can't have this. So it's brilliant, and Ceratrix is like, Doctor, join me, you can reclaim your name, you can be the Doctor once more. Even though that's quite a promising thing for the Doctor, he knows deep down that the Daleks will never want peace. They want to conquer all life. So that's very good, and his ignorance will be his downfall, and very much so. Olestra, she has very much two sides, with her being very devious, but she manages to control the two sides with her. I'm not going to go into detail with why she's two sided. I was going to then, but I thought no, I better not. We'll just spoil it. And she's come to the conclusion that she knows that the only way of stopping the Time War is by the complete destruction of the Daleks. And there's a nice little moment between her and the Doctor where she says, I'm glad you're on our side, Doctor. So that's a nice little moment. The Talians are great in this as well. They're very much like the Daleks, but to achieve victory they are willing to sacrifice their enemies and put their families through hell just to achieve victory. So that's very interesting, and again matches with Dalek similarity. Now, I haven't really spoken much about the Daleks. That's because they haven't really featured heavily within the plot, but this is obviously when the Daleks get their time to shine, with them being devious and sly, very much like Power of the Daleks. But to be honest, they're still not in it that much as you would expect. It's not a Dalek heavy story. By halfway point, the Daleks are practically out of the story, I suppose. Yeah, they're still good within it, and they're, as you would expect, devious and cunning with their whole plan, with that whole 60s vibe within it. So my overall thoughts on The Heart of Battle: it's a good concluding story, nice bit of action bits, conflict throughout, which is just great, because it just proves you don't need big explosions. You can have war with words, and it ties up the first set brilliantly. Comes in full circle, so I'm going to rate The Heart of Battle a well-deserved 8 out of 10. Right, so what are my concluding thoughts on this box set? Yes, it is a welcome addition to have the War Doctor and audios, because there's so many adventures yet to tell, and I'm very much excited for Infernal Devices. Hopefully that it can live up to this box set, because I've got to say, the stories have been quite a high standard despite the drop in quality with 1,000 Worlds, but that is to be forgiven, because it is the builder episode for the finale. And Nicholas Briggs has redeemed himself, because as you know, I haven't been much of a fan of Nicholas Briggs since The Defected. I think he's been sort of hit and miss, but he's redeemed himself for this. He's proved that he can write, he can write the Daleks and he can write the War Doctor. And just listening to this, and then you watch the 50th, you think the War Doctor, there are two different versions of the War Doctor. It just seems bizarre that how he's wrote in the TV story is so different to how he's wrote in the audio. So it's very interesting. It's like two different characters, and I think I prefer the War Doctor on audio. So I better rate this box set as a whole. I'm gonna give Only the Monstrous a well-deserved 8 out of 10. Yeah, fantastic acting throughout, fantastic storyline, and I like that this box set is very much contained to one setting, whereas I think the next box sets are going to expand further into the universe and see the whole terror of the Time War. This is very much a contained box set, and I think it's quite nice. Just have a nice little contained box set. Nice simple story, great introduction story, nice character piece, and it's sort of nice that the Daleks aren't heavily within it. There are enemies what aren't the Daleks. You've got the Talians and some Time Lords, so you don't know where to turn. So it's very interesting that you don't need the Daleks to be the main threat of this box set. So overall, fantastic acting by John Hurt, Lucy Briggs, Caroline Seymour, Beth Chalmers, Jacqueline Pearce. Fantastic acting throughout this set, and it's truly a welcome addition to any Big Finish listeners collection. So I'm very much looking forward to the rest of this series, and I will continue reviewing this series. Hope you guys have enjoyed this review, and I'll see you in my next review, whatever that will be. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.